Hi, Gloria. This is Professor Evans with feedback on your SA2, the rhetorical analysis. So a couple of things when we start thinking about this. We want to go back to what our criteria for excellence is, which we're looking for an effective introduction that would engage the audience, a clear thesis that would tell us where we're going, like a roadmap, a kind of well-structured, effective argument, specific examples that support assertions that we're making, a fairly limited scope in what we're trying to look at, maybe one or two rhetoric elements as opposed to a lot of them. And then, and I think this is the one that you need to pay attention to, is not getting trapped into the meaning of the essay or the purpose of the writer, but rather what your purpose is, which is the rhetorical effectiveness of the essay. So that's one of the things that I really note about this essay is, and it's funny because you literally talk about it in your cover letter. I was arguing against Harris's essay, and I had to prove why torture was morally wrong. That is not your goal for this assignment. Your goal is, in a sense, you really don't care if torture is morally right or wrong. That's not what the point is. The point is that how effective was Harris in making his arguments? What you're doing is you're making an evaluation of what he did to present an argument. Now, you can feel that torture is pretty horrible and that he may have done things that didn't support his case. But you need to be careful, and I think that's where it was. So I kept reading, being like, oh, Gloria really does. She feels strongly about this, and so she's kind of moving into arguing more by why torture would be morally wrong, despite the fact that he said that. You need to be thinking more about what he did. So, a couple of things to talk about. Oh, tiny point right here. And again, thinking about this title, is torture really necessary? Is that a title for his topic or a title for your topic? Your topic is rhetoric analysis or rhetorical analysis. So would that really tell the reader what you were doing? You could do something like, is torture really necessary, a rhetorical analysis of Sam Harris in defense of torture. So that would at least tell the reader where you're going. And remember, because a good title can do just as much work as a good thesis as well. So then all of a sudden we move into this very much talking about torture and barbaric and torturing an innocent person. But the reality is your topic is rhetoric, and and I was wondering if there's some way that you could start with your topic rather than his topic. Maybe what you could talk about is the fact that since he's talking about a position, that he's kind of trying to defend something that a lot of people wouldn't agree with, just kind of basically, oh, I don't think torture's right. So the fact that he's already in a kind of difficult position in terms of an argument. And so maybe you would start there with a concept of like, how do you argue the indefensible? How do you start? How would you approach that? That's the challenge that Sam Harris had in defense of torture, where he has to, argue to his audience why torture should be admissible in some situations. So that then you could go into your example. Okay. I felt that your thesis was a little, how should we say? So you're saying it was a little, I think, unclear. You're kind of get the idea of what you're talking about, but it's kind of a multi-sentence operation. Theses do not, by any stretch of the imagination, have to be a single sentence. But generally in something like this, they're going to tend to be fairly direct. So you're talking about, perfect example of pathos. His target audience is people with families. When we talk about justice and ethics, he uses logos. The question of whether you torture somebody. Okay. You never in here, and remember this is if you go back and look at the prompt, it talks about whether you're kind of the basic basis of your argument is whether it is or is not effective. And I don't think you're doing that. I think you're saying, well, like, you are kind of at least kind of mapping out his argument, but you're not kind of offering up like an aside saying that he did a good job, he did not do a good job, or his use of these elements was strong because it swayed, in a difficult situation. So think about how you could narrow your thesis as well. So then we have this section here, which almost seems more like you're setting up a lot of different kind of scenarios. So we have the bomb scenario, we have the daughter scenario, we have the evil genius scenario, torture, but it seems to be more of you kind of going through systematically what he did. And it's not till here that all of a sudden makes me feel somewhat angry because soldiers are not are trying to kill innocent children. They're trying to protect our country. So this is where all of a sudden you're starting to argue against them. The moral behind this is wrong. Okay. And again, this is where all of a sudden you're kind of slipping out of it. Now, you are pointing to things here that all fall into this category of pathos, where he's talking about, hostage situations, nuclear bomb hidden in Manhattan. The daughter is asphyxiated. In each one of those, you could tease out, although I don't think the bomb's in Manhattan. I think that's in Levine essay. But you could tease out how these work, or why he's picking these situations as opposed to other ones. Kind of the same way we did talk about the Levine essay. Why did he pick Manhattan rather than Peoria? Because Manhattan is kind of the symbolic image of America right there. And so threatening it is going to arouse a crowd more. Oh, well, New York's important. So think about that. And then you kind of come back to this. You're doing this where he's like, oh, he uses lots of women and children. So I think this is where it ties back to your thesis, where it talks about families as an audience relations. But I think it's also rather kind of talking about, well, whenever they talk about like a ship going down, they always say, well, women and children first. So part of it is that our natural sympathies go in that direction, protect the ones we love and our children as well. One of your classmates pointed out that it was a fairly patriarchal viewpoint as well. But at the same time, it's generally kind of the way that... so that may even be some way that you could comment on Harris right there. That he's working in a fairly standard format of, protecting women and children is the role of America. So I think that's interesting as well. So I think my big feedback is this. Think about an introduction that deals more with rhetoric than torture. Think about narrowing your topic, or your thesis, excuse me. Think about arguing less why Harris is wrong in just his thinking, but rather how he's setting up his argument. So this section seems to be more about pathos. This seems to be another example of pathos as well. So maybe all you're really looking at is how he used pathos throughout the entire essay, and the very limited scope in what you're trying to do. All right, I hope this was helpful.